At 3:14 a.m. Gulf Standard Time on Wednesday, a series of flashes lit up the coastline near Bushehr, Iran. Satellite feeds picked up thermal signatures across the South Pars gas field, the largest natural gas reserve on Earth. Israeli jets had hit production infrastructure on a field that holds 8% of the world's proven gas reserves. 6 hours later, at 9:47 a.m. local time, Iranian ballistic missiles slammed into Ras Laffan industrial city in Qatar, one of the most important energy facilities ever built, and set it on fire. By Thursday morning, Qatar's energy minister stood in front of cameras and said the damage would take 3 to 5 years to repair. This war just stopped being about missiles and military budgets. It crossed a line that changes the math for every household in the Western world. How did an air campaign in Iran end up destroying gas infrastructure in Qatar? What does a 3 to 5 year repair timeline actually mean for energy prices? And why is the number you're about to pay at the gas pump, on your heating bill, and on your mortgage this summer going to be directly shaped by what happened in the last 48 hours? Here is what most reports are leaving out about Wednesday's strikes. South Pars is not just another gas field. It is the single largest hydrocarbon accumulation ever discovered, and it sits on the maritime border between Iran and Qatar. The two countries share the same geological reservoir. On Qatar's side, it's called the North Dome, and it feeds directly into Ras Laffan, where nearly all of Qatar's liquefied natural gas is processed, stored, and shipped. Qatar is the world's second largest LNG exporter after the United States, responsible for roughly 20% of all globally traded liquefied natural gas. When Israel hit South Pars, Iran's response was calculated. Tehran didn't fire back at Tel Aviv. It fired at the energy infrastructure of the Gulf states that host American bases. Ras Laffan was the primary target. On Thursday, Qatar's energy minister Saad Al-Kaabi confirmed the numbers. 2 LNG processing units destroyed, 17% of Qatar's total export capacity offline, $20 billion in estimated annual revenue gone, and a repair timeline of 3 to 5 years. That last number is the one that should keep you up at night. This isn't a pipeline that can be welded back together in a few weeks. These are cryogenic liquefaction trains, some of the most complex industrial equipment on the planet. They take years to build from scratch, and they take years to rebuild after a ballistic missile hits them. For the countries that depend on Qatari gas, there is no quick fix. Pakistan imports 99% of its LNG from Qatar. Bangladesh gets 70%. India sources over 40%. Europe gets 12 to 14%, with long-term contracts flowing to Italy, Belgium, China, and South Korea. That gas is now gone from the global market for years. But the damage to Ras Laffan is only one piece of what happened this week. Here's where this gets personal for you, even if you've never heard of Ras Laffan and couldn't find Qatar on a map. The Strait of Hormuz was already effectively closed before Wednesday. Shipping traffic was down 94%. 21 tankers in 20 days, compared to more than 100 per day before the war. Oil was already at $109 a barrel. Then both sides started bombing each other's energy production facilities. And the market responded exactly the way you'd expect. Brent crude surged past $115 a barrel on Thursday. That is a 72% increase from the $67 it sat at before February 28th. European natural gas futures jumped 24% in a single overnight session. And here is the number that connects all of this to your kitchen table. The national average for a gallon of regular gas was $2.98 3 weeks ago. It crossed $3.72 earlier this week. With oil climbing another $7 overnight, analysts are projecting $4 nationally within days. In California, it's already past $5. If you drive 13,500 miles a year, which is the American average, you are on track to spend over $500 more on gasoline this year than you were spending in February. And that is before you factor in what diesel is doing to everything else you bought. Diesel is the number that the nightly news doesn't explain, and it's the one that matters most. Diesel is just under $5 a gallon right now, up $1.34 from last month. But diesel doesn't just fill up trucks. It is the fuel that powers the entire American supply chain. Every head of lettuce, every gallon of milk, every box of cereal, every piece of lumber, every Amazon package, every pharmaceutical shipment, it all moved on diesel at some point between the factory and your front door. When diesel goes up $1, it doesn't show up as one clean line item on your receipt. It shows up as 40 cents more on eggs, 70 cents more on a bag of rice, $1.50 more on a case of bottled water, $15 more on a furniture delivery fee. It's everywhere, and it's compounding. The last time diesel was this expensive was the spring of 2022, right after Russia invaded Ukraine. American grocery bills that year rose at the fastest rate in 4 decades. The USDA reported food-at-home prices climbed 11.4% in a single year. This time, the starting conditions are worse because prices never fully came back down from that 2022 spike. You're paying a war premium on top of a war premium. And it's not just groceries. Heating oil, which millions of homes in the Northeast still depend on, tracks diesel almost exactly. If you're in Connecticut or Massachusetts or Maine, your heating bill this coming winter is being priced right now based on what diesel does this spring. The Department of Energy hasn't updated its winter heating forecast since the war began, but the inputs have changed so dramatically that any projection from February is already obsolete. And there is a reason those prices are not going to come back down quickly, even if the fighting stops tomorrow. The Federal Reserve held interest rates steady on Wednesday at 3.5 to 3.75%. That decision was made before the South Pars strike, before the Ras Laffan missiles, before oil jumped to 115. The Fed held because inflation was already running above its 2% target, driven by the first 3 weeks of oil price increases. Now the picture is dramatically worse. Markets are pricing in 0 rate cuts for 2026. Some economists at EY Parthenon and Carson Group have said publicly that rate hikes are back on the table. Think about what that means for your household. Mortgage rates had dipped below 6% in late February. As of March 16th, they were back to 6.26%. On a $400,000 home, that quarter-point increase adds $60 a month to your payment. Over 30 years, that's $21,600 extra dollars. And if rates push towards 7%, which is now a realistic scenario if oil stays above 100 for the summer, that gap widens further. Credit card rates are already above 22%. Auto loan rates are climbing. Home equity lines are getting more expensive. 6 months ago, every financial forecast in America assumed borrowing was about to get cheaper. That assumption is dead. The Iran war killed it, and the Ras Laffan strike this week buried it. But the price at the pump and the interest rate on your mortgage are only 2 lines on the bill. There's a third one coming, and it's the biggest. On Wednesday, the Washington Post reported that the Pentagon is asking Congress for $200 billion in additional war funding. $200 billion. A week ago, the number being discussed was $50 billion, which already would have been one of the largest wartime supplemental requests in American history. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was asked about the $200 billion figure at a briefing on Thursday. He did not deny it. He said that number could move, and then added, "It takes money to kill bad guys." For context, $200 billion is more than the combined annual budgets of the Department of Education, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Homeland Security, and NASA. Remember the Ras Laffan damage, the 3 to 5 year repair? That's $20 billion in annual revenue lost for Qatar. The Pentagon is asking for 10 times that amount just for the next phase of operations. And that money comes from somewhere. It comes from the same federal budget that funds roads, schools, veterans hospitals, and Social Security. Or it gets added to the national debt, which means higher interest payments, which means less room for the government to do anything else for years to come. At the same time, Reuters reported Thursday that the administration is weighing sending thousands of additional troops to the region, including discussions about ground forces on Iran's Karg Island, which handles 90% of Iran's oil exports. If that happens, the $200 billion will be a down payment, not a final number. For every American taxpayer, this is a bill that will arrive in installments, spread across years of appropriations votes, debt ceiling fights, and budget cuts to programs that have nothing to do with the Middle East. Here is what this week added to a picture that was already severe. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed to normal traffic, with roughly 400 vessels sitting in the Gulf of Oman waiting for safe passage that isn't coming. Iran's IRGC has declared the war will continue until the enemy is completely exhausted. The Gulf states are turning against Tehran, with Qatar expelling Iranian diplomats, Saudi Arabia warning that military options are on the table, and Kuwait arresting a Hezbollah-affiliated terror cell that was planning attacks on its infrastructure. The United Nations International Maritime Organization announced it will begin negotiating a humanitarian corridor to evacuate 20,000 seafarers stranded at sea, unable to move their vessels. 20,000 people on ships loaded with cargo the world needs, burning fuel while they wait for a war to end that shows no signs of ending. And President Trump, after saying the U.S. knew nothing about Israel's strike on South Pars, issued an ultimatum. If Iran hits Qatar's energy infrastructure again, the U.S. will massively blow up the entirety of South Pars. The world's largest gas field, shared between two countries, could be deliberately destroyed in retaliation for an attack that was itself retaliation for an attack on the same field. The escalation logic has become circular, and the energy infrastructure of the entire Persian Gulf is trapped inside it. So here is where things stand on day 20. Oil has climbed 72% in 3 weeks, from $67 to $115. Gas is heading past $4 nationally, with California already above $5. Diesel is near $5, and every product in the American economy is repricing because of it. The Federal Reserve is frozen. Mortgage rates are climbing. The Pentagon is asking for $200 billion. The largest emergency oil reserve release in IEA history, 400 million barrels, has not stopped prices from rising. And now, one of the world's most important LNG facilities has been physically destroyed, with a confirmed repair timeline of 3 to 5 years and 17% of global LNG export capacity taken offline. There are two versions of the next 6 months. In the first, the infrastructure attacks stop here. Trump's ultimatum to Netanyahu holds. Iran, having proved it can strike Gulf energy targets, agrees to scale back in exchange for diplomatic off-ramps. Ras Laffan's surviving units keep operating while the multi-year rebuild begins. Oil settles in the low hundreds. Gas stabilizes around $4. It's the most expensive energy shock since 2022, but the system holds together. In the second version, the infrastructure war continues. More Gulf facilities are hit. South Pars is struck again or destroyed entirely. Saudi Arabia follows through on military action against Iran. Oil pushes past $130, then $140. Gas crosses $5 nationally. European households face a second energy crisis in 4 years. 2 billion people across South Asia lose access to reliable electricity as Qatari LNG disappears from the market for years. And the global economy enters a period of structural energy scarcity that central banks cannot fix with interest rate adjustments, because this time the problem is not demand or monetary policy. The problem is that the physical infrastructure that produces and moves the world's energy is being blown up. 3 weeks ago, the question was how much this war would cost per day. After this week, the question is how many years it will take to rebuild what's already been destroyed. I've been tracking these numbers since February 28th. The trend line has not reversed once, not for a single day. Nobody in Washington, Tehran, or Jerusalem has answered when it will.